Hi boys and girls, it's Mrs. Morhart. I have a book that I want to read to you today. It's one that you can remember. We read this in class before, After the Fall. It's a fabulous book. And one of the reasons I'm reading this book to you today is because I think it's really important when you're reading books to reread some favorites over time. And also I think it's really important to get ideas as a writer from books that you've enjoyed. The other reason why I'm sharing this book with you today is because I love the title at the bottom, which is How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. And right now we've got a really interesting situation in our lives, right? Things are different and we are having to be resourceful. We are having to be inspired. We are having to be flexible. All those things that when we talked about lifelong learning in our classroom, we talked about SOAR, Save Heart Mind, we talked about optimism, we talked about achieving, and we talked about being respectful. Those are all of the tools that right now the adults in your life, your friends, and yourself are having to use. And so that's one of the reasons why I really like the story and I wanted to read it to you again. While I'm reading it, I want you to think about how the author, whose name, by the way, is Dan Santat, how the author used the idea of Humpty Dumpty to create a story that makes you think about, well, what do you do when things aren't going your way? I also want you to think about how this is written in the first person and listen for the short sentences and the long sentences, because that's one of the things as writers I've asked you to do when you're reading. Take a look and pay attention to how other authors are working their sentences. My name is Humpty Dumpty. This was my favorite spot, high up on the wall. I know it's an odd place for an egg to be, but I love being close to the birds. Then one day, I fell. I'm sort of famous for that part. Folks called it the Great Fall, which sounds a little grand. It was just an accident, but it changed my life. Fortunately, all the king's men managed to put me back together again. And when you think about our healthcare workers and what they're doing for people in the hospital, so we've got lots of connections. There were some parts, though, that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. And this is the part when we talk about our emotional health. What are we doing to take care of ourselves? And how are we helping ourselves through those really tricky, challenging emotional parts of our lives? After that day, I became afraid of heights. I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of the regular things that I used to do. I walked past the wall every day, and I would think about climbing that ladder again. I really missed the birds and being high above the city, but I could never do it because I knew that accidents can happen. And so, of course, this is that courage part, and sometimes it's taking a moment to unpack what has happened, what are the risks, and are the risks really real? Are they just our imagination getting bigger and bigger and bigger? Really important to listen to those stories we're telling ourselves in our own heads, isn't it? I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. Then one day, an idea flew by. Making planes was harder than I thought. It was easy to get cuts and scratches, but day after day I kept trying and trying. This is some repetitive language in this story, trying and trying. We've talked about using a word more than once when you're writing. Until I got it just right. My plane was perfect and it flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt that happy in a long time. It wasn't the same as being up in the sky with the birds, but it was close enough. Did anybody notice whether or not he asked anybody for help? Did he go and say to a friend, hey, I've got this problem, I'm not sure what to do about it? He talked to his, parents. Did he go and talk to somebody who's really good at giving ideas, like maybe the school counselor? Or did he just try and go it alone? Let's find that interesting when I read this book. What do you think? Unfortunately, accidents happen. Things turning out the way he wants them to. What do we do when things don't go the way we want them to? Are we able to find our way through? Unfortunately, accidents happen. They always do. I almost walked away again. But then I thought about all the time I'd spent working on my plane and all the other things I'd missed. I decided I was going to climb that wall. But the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it. I was terrified. I didn't look up. I didn't look down. I just kept climbing, one step at a time. So notice how the author used shorter sentences there. I didn't look up. I didn't look down. I just kept climbing. Pretty effective. Until I was no longer afraid. Maybe now you won't think of me as that egg who was famous for falling. Hopefully, you'll remember me as the egg who got back up. Pretty awesome story. When we're reading it, or when I'm reading this, it reminds me of Chris Hadfield, famous astronaut, Canadian astronaut, and how he talked about whenever he was going to do a space mission, he had to look at everything that could potentially go wrong and have a plan for it. So he wasn't afraid of it. He wasn't worried about things, but he did have an idea in mind. And sometimes we don't have plans for things when they go wrong, but we do have our brains, we do have friends and family around us. We have resources that can help us come up with all those ideas and ways to help us through a situation. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you're thinking about how you can take a fairy tale again and maybe write it with a little twist to it, because I know we did that earlier this year. And I hope you're listening to how the author, Dan Santat, used language and first person to make this an effective story. Bye for now.